With no one with any bonus chips, strategic warfare is kind of neutralized out again. The Russians are still down one factory from it, but yeah, with all the advantages they think the Axis has over the West, they're really not doing much damage to them. Actually, the advantage is +4 to the die roll right now, but it had been higher before, and they're just not, well, for one turn. You can only move at one space, and they're just not getting a lot of traction there. This is the beginning of November. One thing to point out, strategic warfare can be used kind of offensively if you're willing to do it. So like the Germans pushed their perimeter up here with this, I mean, it's not behind their lines, but it's also not contested by the enemy. And likewise the Russians also. Now this one's a little iffier because they moved a damaged unit out of Leningrad. But Leningrad looks safe right now, even though the Axis has kind of pushed hard in that area. I decided, I really need to cover this a little better. That way I can get that armor out of Stalingrad and maybe cut the Germans off down here if they're not careful. And, well, after seeing that, the Germans might feel like they need to be a little bit more careful. Alright, the noise in the background is because we're getting near the end of the semester and there are some kids renting in this area. Decided, whatever. Anyway, the Axis really hasn't been able to do much at all this turn. Clever use of Soviet tanks prevented a couple of possible destructions from happening. The Germans lost a step over here. They pulled back here, kind of tried to carve a little bit more closer range to Stalingrad, giving up on the Grozny area because that was just too painful. I decided to leave my tank here, and I was successful in tracing supply, in part because there's terrible weather. It's aircraft carriers reduced further in the poor weather now that I know the modifier, and in addition, the rolls are halved, so it was really unlikely to be able to actually stomp an enemy ship. Interdiction's difficult in bad weather, in particular. Just like the air-to-air combat is, the Germans mostly wiped out the Soviet stuff. They had to move a plane up here, so they left the Soviets with one extra plane that was also used in defensive, I think, that unit. So the line's kind of stabilized again, but it's bad weather, right? It always has trouble moving in bad weather. Sometimes you're able to get some advantages, but in this case, no lucky rolls or anything like that. It's only poor weather. It's not severe. Well, however you want to look at that, because I think severe generally tends to be better for land combat. Anyway, now it's on to the Allies, and here's the one problem with this German unit here. It is in the good weather zone, which means the planes, the tank, and itself it's a tank, so are going to have a better effect than they would otherwise. Turks, the Turks. Well, first of all, I pulled down from Ankara. It was kind of a mistake to set up there. I should have set up here. I wouldn't have had to spend a point to do it. But they succeeded in grabbing Kuwait and then started heading back up immediately. The Allies want to drop an invasion 20-buck chit there, and they might. Just a U.S. invasion, right? Let them. But, because even the U.S. invasion, that's going to be a 4-turn turnaround cycle. And I'm just not counting on being able to hold Turkey anyway. But if I can get this up here and try to help defend things a little bit better, that's better. The strategic warfare bonus, it's just not worth, the amount of effort that I've put into it, to tell you the truth. All right, on to the West. For the Allies, that tank is just too damn strong. I mean, I'm basically fighting it at even, throwing everything I can. The air units, my own armor, my tanks that I committed over here, everything into it, and it's not budging it. On the other hand, I am positioning for the invasion in Kuwait. Once I get both Basra and Kuwait, it's going to take me a couple of turns. I get rid of a strategic warfare penalty. I don't see that as any real disadvantage possible to that action for me. The thing is, it would be great for the Turks to hold that, but I just don't believe they can afford the unit down there any longer. And it took so damn long getting it, and now I can't afford to keep it. Lots and lots of supply costs going by. The one thing that was a bright spot for it, the 9th Air Force knocked out the Italians mostly. They still got the advantage. But that was enough to slip the 4th Fleet through with the bad weather, terrible weather. I didn't want to launch an attack, so I let them get through. And that's going to spell some real problems for the Italian fleet maintaining that supply. Next turn may be the turn that the Germans abandon the Near East and pull back. On the other hand, they might want to stay there. It's only a -2. They may not get destroyed in trying to hold that. They may be able to play a delaying game. So that's kind of a hard thing. That is one hell of a good unit. That's just all there is to it. Also managed to sail the British fleet back and then forth 2 separate sorties. I believe that's allowed, as long as the infantry doesn't do anything. And I pulled my motorized infantry into Britain. The only real reason for that is proximity in case I want to do an invasion into France. I'm going to have to do something different if I want to launch an invasion from North Africa into Sicily or whatever. And just maintaining this is taxing my convoy capabilities. Granted, I have an extra unit kicking around down here that I could throw in elsewhere. The problem with the North Africa is it does commit my ships to moving down through here, a couple extra turns, a little bit extra time for the actual landings. Before the landings take place, where I'm supplying the units and they're not really fighting. Now, again, I can do some limited supply if they're not really doing anything. Alrighty, on to the Soviets. The Soviets also don't get the results they're looking for, but they were able to make things kind of unpleasant for Germany's next turn. And this guy's isolated here. If I want to get him, I gotta dig him out. This guy, he's actually also isolated. Not sure why I didn't launch an attack against him. Oh no, he's not. He can retreat here, and I don't want him to do that because then he's actually in range of hitting, say, Stalingrad or back here. He'll be out of supply doing it, but it could be enough to throw the Russians into a loss. They're not that far from it. So if a really good turn starts rolling, I don't want an easy attack to come out of that. But yeah, this is a situation where the Germans are really going to have to work to get out of that kind of bubble that they got themselves into there. And other than that, not much up here. These air units got used in this attacks. Well, more than one attack there. There was an assault and then a follow-up attack that actually damaged the Russians. And they made an attempt here that didn't go very well. So not a lot of movement. And that puts us into time to build up the supply. Winter is harsh in this game. Bad weather is harsh. It's really tough to move those lines when the weather's not good. We slither into December. I guess the most exciting thing in a sense is we got an upgraded Russian tank unit upgraded to a Guards tank unit, an extra +1. That makes it almost as good as German tanks, or English tanks. It's as good as English tanks. But that's nice. Otherwise, mostly, so the Germans were able to build just about everything. I don't think they had any costs they couldn't. The Western Allies, not quite as freely able to spend. For example, my bombers, I'm leaving them unspent for, worrying more about getting supplies into North Africa. I'm a little confused. Well, no, here's why. Okay. I was trying to figure out why I was able to buy off all the British supply, and that's because there's this extra convoy here, and that's actually got some extra, more hits than it did before. I transferred some of them over there. I think we're going to be seeing an invasion in Kuwait. The counter is not that big an expense for me since I get it back for free. It's just time, and I don't really feel like the Allies need to do anything else getting rid of the strategic warfare thing. They'll still have one more surprise counter to play. Nothing else too exciting. More German economic expansion, which is cool. It's like the Lend-Lease. It just starts cranking up their income, and they'll be able to actually maybe afford this war. Yugoslavs upgrading their unit here. Get thrown back in. All kinds of crap. I got bogged down in the supply rules again, and I'm kind of having a hard time remembering what's happened. The Germans managed to kill another Russian unit and made attempts on others. Over here, just tons and tons of attacks here, hoping to, get a retreat that would cause one of those Russian units to be destroyed. This is the only one that could have gotten out of there. I actually overspent again on my Germans. I meant to save one more point than I did. I sent my Turks back down. I just can't make my mind up, but seeing them there, and it's a long way out, yeah, the hell with it. I wish I had a garrison in there. Could have shipped one there, but then I wouldn't have the defenses. The Turks did make an attack here to no effect. Over here, it's kind of interesting. I was able to move from zone to zone because they're completely separate. You can't move from one zone of a single unit to this zone of the same unit, but you can kind of slip through if there's 2 unit zones there. Kinda. Like I could leave this zone and get into this one. And that allowed me to save these guys in supply, at least temporarily, but they're still in it. Maybe it would have been better to give up this unit because this is in a really, really risky position. And I could see the Soviets pretty much crushing that whole little pocket down there. Okay, so the problem is this. I started moving my Italians. I moved the Italian Air Force over here onto the boot. Get it out of range of the U.S. Of course, the U.S. can just sail up to Malta, fly over to Malta, and keep bombing from there. So it may not serve me any good purpose. Problem with Malta is it's hard to supply Malta. That's great for the garrison. It gets it for free, but anything else, I've got to get a convoy there just for that air unit. And that becomes maybe less interesting. Okay, so the Italians set sail with this and were intercepted by the U.S. fleet and defeated. I can go again or whatever, but now I'm at the point of kind of saying, okay, the hell with it. I'll take my low supply for my Germans. Probably means they get pushed back, maybe means they die. But I still got to supply the warships. Now, I know there's a role. It was pointed out to me, and I went and looked it up, that warships can supply themselves without using a sortie. Maybe I'll find it somewhere. But then when I look down here, which is where warships and their special ability on supply kind of comes into play, it doesn't specify that. And the only thing I can think of now, because I've been trying to look elsewhere, is maybe it's in some other location under sorties. No. And this is kind of the problem. When you know there's a rule out there and you got no idea where it is. Some special little exception, but it is not where you expect it to be, and there doesn't seem to be a reference to it there. Of course, I could be blind, and maybe it's right where I'm looking and I'm not seeing it. I wouldn't put that past me, but I mean, I've read through this a couple of times, and I'm just not seeing it here. And then maybe Sea Supply says it here. I bet you it does. Yeah, it's an exception under Sea Supply sorties. Okay. I don't know if I want to try that either, though, because I'm just as susceptible to the U.S. fleet as if I try to support the whole thing. So I think I'm going to try to send the whole convoy out. I don't have a lot of hopes here, though. Well, this sucker got knocked down to -6, and now he can kind of get in supply for free. Basically, once a fleet gets down there. But my convoy failed there. I think I actually had to go to the Task Force H, the carrier, to finish that off. But then this thing starts coming out, and well, first I used the fleet because that's U.S. U.S. units kind of recover for free because they have infinite money. So I figured, well, even though my odds aren't as good, I'll go for that. And I think I managed to knock out the Italian fleet, so it's no longer providing an escort. And then I start using the planes. And the Italians actually managed to get supply in for the Germans. But it's not going to last much longer. They're getting into really ugly conditions. Part of it is the bad weather, the poor weather with the -2 on the die roll. Makes it easier for you to slip away. Hey, that's kind of cool, isn't it? Thinking about, the Bismarck when the fog and the bad weather is into play, how you can kind of slip your assets, the Bismarck and the Prince Eugene through more easily. But also it's harder to find the Allied shipping at the same time. Okay, so it looks like the Axis has maintained something there, but it also looks like I'm pretty much getting stripped of my Mediterranean power, which is going to make it much, much easier for the Allies to cut through here at least, and maybe to operate in Italy with those planes getting kind of tired out. The Western Allies crap out again here along the line, using a lot of resources up. They choose not to make the invasion, and there's this weird game of, well, if you move away, we'll move away, but if you come back, we're coming back. Just a really obnoxious little play for the Russians, the other side of the United Nations. Successful attack actually here, push things out of the way, but I'm still not getting anything on the Turks. And then over here, if I could clear this little pocket of Axis units up, and I sure tried, I would be able, checking my supply to make sure I'm okay. I had to put this here to prevent, being able to run up. But if I could have cut this or whatever, I would be able to start driving that apart and then maybe send a new unit down here. Maybe I can anyway. If I build something in Tiflis, just send it down, because I don't feel like I have enough units here in Turkey. And that's more or less where I gave up. Was there. I've already overspent. Good opportunity, had to do it. The elite tanks went in. They didn't do anything. Then I did an assault and knocked this down, but it's going to rebuild, probably. It's hard to tell because all sides are kind of running low on cash and not able to do everything they want to. And speaking of which, nothing's in real supply problems, so we'll start buying stuff back. I don't know if I screwed up, cheated, or what. The Germans had a whole lot more money than I expected on them. More than they needed. The Russians were tight. They were unable to rebuild these air units and get everything else, and I wanted everything else. They also just got their first of their 2 surprise attack markers. They'll get one again next year. They can't really do a naval invasion. I mean, they can, but it's of so little value for them. So, under any normal circumstance, and this is normal enough, I may well just fire it off to try to get here, or somewhat less likely over in Turkey. I did build myself some guards to send down that way. Clearing this little nest out, that is going to start rolling up, getting me a lot of forces to start rolling up the flank in Russia. So it seems very, very appealing to just wipe them out very quickly and then launch across. The negative to that, of course, is we're still in the winter. And a surprise attack, I think it's +1 within a few hexes, within like 2 hexes. There we go. +1 any unit defending within 2 hexes of the marker. So that's kind of a, if I've got a big lump like here or here that I want to break through, it might make sense. But maybe I've got enough on this already that I can just reduce it, wait until better weather, and just throw it in and launch it when I hit my major attacks. I think, maybe, I don't know. Not sure quite, I mean, a +1 in a lot of locations where there's kind of a defensive line, that's pretty potent. But I've already subverted this line so much. We'll see what the Germans do. They may be able to extricate some of that, or maybe actually destroy some of this. They're going to have some Yugoslavs. This isn't going to help much, and it's just, it's so expensive to shift your whole line so that you can get an extra unit in an attack. You're used to being able to do that in a war game. Just, all right, I got too heavy a concentration here. I'll kind of thin this out, and that'll give me a couple extra units to finish this off. But this game does not work that way. You're paying something that's very, very valuable in the sense that you don't have a whole lot of production to handle a whole front, and you got to do your rebuilds with it. You got to refill your airplanes. It's really something that's missing in so many of the strategic games. It may be a little too emphasized here. I'm just thinking in comparison, if you play an OCS game, you usually have enough supplies. Well, first of all, you don't spend supplies in movement, if I recall correctly, in OCS. And so it's kind of weird to have to spend the supplies in movement here, whereas you don't have to spend anything to just exist. However, it does make a lot of sense that if you're not doing much, the production cost would be less. I don't know which one I favor. To some extent, it feels like there should be some cost to maintaining the armies, but in a sense, yeah, there only really is if you've got to supply something like North Africa. In the East, you just have enough supplies as long as you maintain your rail net, and that doesn't cost you any of your production. It would be a nightmare if you had to, pay per unit or something. There's no question that would be a real annoyance to have to do, and probably wouldn't add much to the game at all in terms of changing situations. The only thing it would change is if your army's pretty much destroyed, you'd get away a little cheaper and maybe be able to rebuild it a little faster. Okay, so the economics, first the weather. Things got a little better or worse in Russia. And on the economic side, the Germans spent one of their subs, they have 2 of them now, so they have 1 left, against the Soviets. Now, that worked for them, and you actually have a reduction in Soviets, but then they chose, since they had the bonus, not to use a sub against the Allies. The Allies used one of their 2 Ultras. I may have cheated with one of these because I don't remember receiving an Ultra and rolling a die for how long it was going to take. Whatever. 2 of them are coming back in June. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I I can't make any judgment on that. Anyway, they used one of their ultras and ended up winning. So theirs have gone down and the Germans have gone up. Not a good thing for the Germans. And I guess in strategic movement I threw an infantry in here to Rostov. You know, there's almost a desire to go down to here or to the, because that's going to be harder to cover for. I'm not sure, because I can't just let the Soviets slide into the Crimea again. But yeah, I could drop it here. The problem is that I may want to use this to try to extricate things. That's my worry. I don't know. I'll stick with what I've got. No one else wants to do strategic movement. It's kind of a hose for the Russians to do. So basically, if you can move somewhere and you have the points to operate, you don't really want to do it. So like, I could shift this down here, but then that means it won't be doing anything this turn, and it won't be until next turn that it gets to recover its full strength. So there's kind of a, I could recover my strength now and shift it by strategic movement next turn if I don't feel like if I haven't moved it forward before then. And over here, we're too tight to do anything like that. Here we might be moving into play against, into Malta against the Italians or something. I'm not sure. Okie dokie. The Axis over here tries desperately to break out. They fail, but they are in supply. Whatever that means. Turks made a little attack here. You can see a lot of kind of ancillary attacks because the Germans actually have a lot of money to spend and not much to spend it on. They fix all their planes. They probably might want to try to get these airplanes up to compete with the Allied forces, because the Allies are kind of stretching their economy, and if I can start air to air even at a disadvantage, it might be for the best. But you know, this time I was able to spend all my money, and here's where the most of it took place, at least in terms of effectiveness. Managed to destroy one Soviet unit and get in a position where this thing should have been popped. But we're making some significant inroads up there, even if we're not doing anything anywhere else. Unfortunate side though for me, I left two planes, two Soviet planes uninterdicted. You know, I didn't airstrike them, and that gives them some offensive capability I don't usually have them to have, and this is also nothing I could do about that. On the bright side, somehow the Italian fleet slipped through again. Interceptions by both of these. The poor weather was enough to give them so that they didn't take much damage, and well, so they ended up rolling approximately the same. So both sides took one damage. I don't have other units that I can intercept with. So the German army leaving it there was definitely a good move. As long as I've got kind of a roadblock everywhere, it's good. The problem is if this were part of the roadblock crumbles, i.e. Turkey just disappears, it's all over down here. And if I get the Germans out into Turkey, into Anatolia proper, then I can escape with that armored unit. Otherwise, I'm going to take a national will loss for losing it. But you know what? I think that national will loss is worthwhile to get the extra. It's not an extra turn delay. You know, because although the Allies can storm up here in a turn or whatever, it's actually preventing the Allies from turning the Turkish flank and giving it all up. So, you know, I mean, if the German unit was down here, it wouldn't necessarily be all that much safer. And so the only real safety is to throw it in the background. And I've got a lot of national will for Germany. Now, granted, this is how you lose the game. I'm at 64. I think I can sacrifice one down here. Of course, a lot of that's tied up in Russian territory and conquered areas that are going to, and my own cities, that are going to disappear from my bankroll. Well, no, the ones in the Russian territory don't count. It's my own cities that are at danger. And I don't know if I have 60 points of cities, so I think I can afford to lose the unit, and I can afford the economic cost. This is not pleasant, though. That much I'll say. Alright, we're moving to the Allied side of things. Well, with no sign of the line breaking, the Allies get stopped here again. And it's really a string of terrible luck. Because if they ever once, basically they're fighting at nearly even. Sometimes at a, no, I think it's always, let me see. +2, +3, +2, +4. Yeah. So with their tanks and everything else in play, and the air power, they're ending up rolls at even. And they're never getting a dice spread enough in their favor. We're basically looking at +4 to +4. So in this area of the chart, which is about 3 in either, well, 3 in the positive direction. Now, eventually that's got to happen, but it just hasn't been happening. And as you go further down the chart, you can see the needed spread increases. The bigger the bonuses on each side, so an armored, air power, this, that, and the other, is really going to be hard to dislodge no matter how much cool shit you throw at it. The war doesn't become more mobile by all kind of tanks and planes as long as they're on both sides. It actually becomes more static, which feels kind of funny. But anyway, there's been no dislodging. I've decided the hell with it, and I'm sending U.S. troops around Africa to make the invasion in Kuwait. I can't do it with this. But U.S. troops should be capable, the motorized unit, should be capable of dislodging that Turk. I've got an armored bonus there, and perhaps some other things. You know what I forgot to do that I should have? I had these damn partisans. I could have used them and really dislodged from that location. And I just didn't see them because they're green and I'm dealing with tan pieces mainly over here. Now, I don't know if that's it, but yeah, I think I could have undermined it. Anyway, we're moving on to the Russian turn here, and this should definitely some possibilities for opening this up, and this is a problem. I don't know. I don't see that I'll necessarily be worth trying to save that unit. You know, it would be stripping off these key units up to defend the front, but if I do try and fail, I'm in a lot of trouble, really, because that'll open up a gap here. Of course, I could move this one over to fill the gap. I go, something needs building. I always need to build something with the Russians. I opened things off with this pocket down here, and I threw everything at it. The attack, the surprise attack, some partisans over here after failures against the Hungarians went, trying to cut this piece off. But I'm almost out of attacks. I can't cut it off. I've got these Hungarians here. I've got one more unit here. I don't have really anything I can get into place here. And I was kind of hoping this would just dissolve and then I could use the surprise attack to drive this way. But man, between the bad weather and, you know, solid German troops, I'm doing pretty much what the Allies were doing here, rolling against even or a +1, air units thrown in, everything. Wow, really, really tough to fight there. And it's the poor weather. Severe weather, I would have been able to handle this. Yes, I wouldn't have the air unit, and the tanks wouldn't have the effectiveness. But one of the problems is I used all my actual little tank counters on defense, figuring, hey, I got the partisans, I'll be able to blow my way through. Yeah, that hasn't happened, and now things look pretty damn bad. I can at least get an isolated attack on this thing by charging either the armor or the motorized elite, and they're the same at this point because of the bad weather, into place here. And this is the guards tanks, and they weren't able to do it, to try to see if I can take that unit out at least. Man, that was ugly. It seems like I just can't roll worth shit. Sent this in, sent the armor in. All of these were rolls at +2 between the surprise attacks, the partisans in place. Yeah, +2 to 0. Didn't budge them one bit. Not one bit. And now I gotta move out of Stalingrad to cover my line, I guess. Ouch. That, yeah, part of it I was thinking, well, with these even rolls, you gotta get a certain spread. And the even rolls, though, were around 0, so that spread's not that big. It's just a couple of pips instead of the deeper 3-pip spread on the dice. But this has just been somewhat traumatic for the Russian army. I gotta count my supplies. It looks like I have a pretty good amount left. I have 21 left. I haven't spent that much. So I kind of want to do some things down here against the Turks. But I gotta also maintain 15 for my air power, 16, 17, 18, 19. There's probably a couple more points lying around there. I'm going to have to buy that for 20. Okay, there's not... Alright, I'm at the limits already. Well, there's things I got to do. Better than I thought, too. Situation down here. This guy's actually going to be out of supply. It doesn't just kill him right away, but it does make the German escape easier. And then I noticed the Axis managed to kind of pocket these guys, so they're out of supply if there's no city in here, and I don't think there is. Tiny hexes make it hard to determine that information. I got some big problems on the Soviet front. Alright, so we're gonna... I had to spend to block the line here, but now I got to try to save these guys. Okay, and I got everybody in supply, I guess. Pushed there. I don't like doing that, but I don't know if that's worth it. I think I should just pop that unit. Move this back. Let this guy die. So he would get a low supply marker. I would rather lose the unit than open myself up to an eliminated unit there. So this actually highlights one of the things that's kind of cool, or maybe really frustrating, depending on your mindset, about these kind of impulse action situations. So the game's got this, you move one unit and you do everything you can with it, you move another. Well, first of all, we've seen before where I move a unit and, oh shit, now I've broken up my positioning and I've got to move another unit in. But also, it's very easy to get this kind of push your luck type situation, or push your lack of luck in this kind of circumstance where you looked at the board and said, I am going to be able to win this fight. And it's going to be easy, and I'm going to be able to swing through. And then the reality of the die rolls doesn't meet your expectations at all, whether your expectations were grounded or not, and I think they were here. And you feel this compulsion to just keep throwing things in, or maybe you actually have to keep throwing things in order to keep things in supply. So as an example, this unit here, oh, this is the problem guy. I don't have a way. Yeah, he's going to get the low supply marker. Do I want to leave him there essentially at a penalty with that low supply marker? I've got nothing I can do about him. Or do I want to take him as a loss? Now, he's more expensive to rebuild. I don't really have much national will left. He's in kind of a key location. If I pop him, that makes the Axis life a lot easier. If I don't, well, maybe the weather will be bad enough that he can survive. I'm not sure I like spending this point of national will if it comes to that. I'm only at 7. That drops to 6. That means 3 cities. That's a good sized breakthrough, and that's it. You know, there's a city up here. It's not really available, but it's not too far. Oh, what do we got here? Yes. No. Rizhev. Oh, there's Ryazan. On the other hand, I really hate giving up my unit as well. I'm going to take my chances and try to keep it there because the Axis essentially escapes for free if I don't leave that unit there. We'll see what the costs are on that in the end. I've got some economics and such not to take care of, though. There's something that my transport of the U.S. troops had done that I didn't want to stay standing, and it really has very little effect. So I cheated the English Mediterranean fleet up into Southampton. I think the chances of some kind of German invasion are just about nothing. And they actually are nothing because I don't have this available. But I just can't stand not having a home fleet there. That scares me. And it didn't really cost anything because I was able to do repairs on it. Otherwise, well, you know, the Soviets, with what they spent on their turn, didn't get all the repairs they would have liked. So got some air units in pretty bad shape. The Germans actually had extra money again. Turks showing up here. I think I bought off my Italian fleet, getting it into somewhat better shape, and that's about it. We're ready to move into, I guess, February. Okay, we had a big jump because I went to Consim World, and I probably should have loaded this up earlier. I'm going to take a few moments, though, and then I'm going to play a turn out. I've been having a hard time kind of getting back to the game. I took the rest of yesterday. Yesterday I was still at the convention, actually, but I came home early, and I had a hard time getting into this, and I've had a hard time dragging into it today, too. Not anything so much as the shift between, wow, I was doing so much at the con, and now here I am, and you know, do I really want to play this? It's the shifting of gears. I know I'll enjoy it if I start playing it. It's not like, oh, geez, I don't like playing games solo now. You know, I know people who I can play with, and I did meet some guys at the con. One thing that I wanted to bring up, though, there's an interesting comparison that I saw because I saw people who did the historical West First scenario fairly deep into it. Deep enough to get into Barbarossa, at least. I don't know how far they got throughout the con, but I don't think they actually finished, but they may have gotten to a point where they could pretty much determine how well they were doing. And in that scenario, the national will for the Soviets after appeasement ends jumps up to about 85. So if you go west first, I may have said east first. I'm having trouble with my poor brain. But they went west first, and that drops the points down. And then marching, you know, once once the appeasement policy ends, which it didn't in my scenario, that jumps their will up to like 85 points. So I had some question, geez, am I doing things wrong because of the Moscow Treaty? Now, it turns out the way I am doing it right. The Moscow Treaty sets it to 45. Appeasement has no effect on that when the Moscow Treaty ends. It sets it to 45. So if you go east first, you never face the full difficult situation of the Soviet Union. Now, here, I'm fairly close to taking them out a second time. It's going to be in the balance, there's no question there. But in the full game, you have to go pretty deep. Now, of course, all this territory counting against you would be a big deal too. But you can see that's about halfway. So by going east first, you never have to hit Russia quite as hard as you do, I guess, when you follow the more historical path. Whether or not that's, particularly an easy route to take, though, I'm not convinced of that at all. This is right now hanging in this balance where I don't know if I'm going to break the Soviets, but if I do not break the Soviets, they are going to, be a serious counterattack in the near future, and then I'm not sure whether I can last, close to the scenario end victory condition, which is really the win-loss point. You make it past there, you win this the axis. You don't make it past there, you lose. There are so many holes showing, though, in the axis lines. Back here in Turkey, and then up in the in the Russian area, where it's getting more and more difficult. That it's not a sure thing at all whether or not things are just going to collapse outright, or if I'm going to be able to hold on long enough to just go another couple of turns and hopefully be able to push the Russians over the edge, probably during the good weather coming up eventually. I should touch on the economic warfare. The Germans actually won on both fronts, knocking the Russians to -3 here and getting the Western Allies heading backwards, although the Western Allies used their partisans to their advantage. I'm partway through the German operations phase, not very deep in. I was trying to eliminate this unit, and I got a reduction on it, but that's the best I could do with, multiple mobile assaults here, and then, or mobile attacks, and then an assault down there with the Yugoslavs and Hungarians. I was hoping to kill it because I want to knock down their will, obviously. Now, it looks like there's valuable will up here, and Leningrad is, of course, fortified, so results are halved against that. That's not pleasant, especially with the -2 to the die roll first. But it looks like maybe I could curve around here. Here's the problem. This is the hex row, the 1600 hex row, that if I enter that or go beyond it, I'm going to trigger the northern reinforcements. That's 2 more Soviet armies. Giving the Soviets more troops up there kind of, defeats the advantage in weight that I've kind of gathered here. So I'm not sure I terribly want to do that. Basically, as soon as I enter there, we're going to see a reinforcement pop up there. So then, this apparent vulnerability here goes away. Now, if I could slip in to this hex, it would be great. Because then I'd have an isolated armor unit I could start beating up on. But I can't slip through that zone of control, and I just do not see an easy way forward without getting into this hex. Now, if I get into this hex, yes, I have my isolation attack, and I think I should do it anyway. But I hate giving the Russians their extra pieces. Thing to keep in mind, this would normally be a safe, distance to be apart. I could move into this hex or this hex, but I couldn't get to this one. But because the Soviet units are in the fort, I can drive through there. A little mistaken too. It has to be, the units placed have to be north of 1500 row, which means actually I can't just drop it in this city here. So the Germans were able to take that city. Here's the new units. Not anywhere near as bad a situation as I thought for the Germans. They gained a couple of will points. This isolated unit, though, they failed to kill it in the assault. And that's kind of a bummer. Had to take out some of the Soviet air power. Soviets actually, I believe, have more air power on the front right now. These two match off, and then there's just a two-sortie unit. So kind of attacks in the center might not be worthwhile. I've still got another, not quite, maybe 8 points or so that I'd feel comfortable spending, given the points I have to spend to produce stuff. You know, repairing my own sorties and such not. But it's going to be painful going up against those extra column shifts for the planes. All the tanks have been burned off over here pretty much. Okay, Axis operations are creating a bit of a problem. I may want to move these planes, although they protect me to some extent from invasion, up to here. I'll get to that in a moment. I haven't decided. Well, it's too late because I failed my supply checks, so it would have to be next turn. Attacks over here as we crap. No, we're not terribly successful, even with that out of supply marker there. Gotta be careful. I can't play much because it's getting too hot and I'm going to drip on the map. There were some attacks here to no real effect. The only real successes were up here, and we saw that wasn't in combat. That was simply being able to maneuver into that city. We were not able to damage anything. Had to fill in the gap here. Actually threw these motorized into the gap here with the hope that I can kind of pocket those Russians a little bit more effectively. But so far they've been able to hold their own there. Now over in the supply situation, both the US and the Brits ended up contesting supply here, and the US failed to catch the convoy. Basically they knocked the fleet out. They failed to get the convoy. Force H though didn't have a problem catching the convoy. I think I put the poor weather modifier in effect, and it shouldn't have been. It should have been fair weather, which would have made it even easier to screw with them. And that's why I'm beginning to think that I'm going to need this air unit over there. I'm not sure how I'm going to get it there. It's on the rails, so I could strategic move it there, but that'll leave me off a turn. Right now, these guys are in low supply, tracing from back into Ankara. They won't disappear, but they're going to be a lot easier to move out of there. And of course, if they die, that's national will for the Germans that goes away. Well, for the Allies, with the Germans out of supply back here, it wasn't too hard to punch through them. Certainly not compared to what it was, and we actually managed to eliminate the unit. And that's the danger. The in-supply unit pretty much could assure it wasn't going to take bad enough hits, but the out-of-supply unit, it was or low supply, with that extra -2 on there, it was capable of actually being knocked completely out of the way. Otherwise, it would have just been pushed slowly up the coast, which would have been fine. Losing the unit means point of will. Turkey's pretty much out of the war at this point. I mean, there's going to be another month of fighting or whatever, but it's pretty obvious the English armor is going to be able to make it up here. The Turks will try to rearrange, create some kind of defenses, but there just isn't much here. And if it's not the Brits who take them out, it's a significant amount of Russians, because I did a strategic movement there. Won't be this turn, though. I don't think. Unless the Russians get stupid lucky, and I'm probably not even going to set up for that. Ignored this, but I am cutting through with the BEF there to grab the territory. Supply situation in North Africa is still rough enough that I don't feel like I can open up another front. I do have some desire to hit Italy. I think I can knock Italy out of the war. That'll drain German troops to hold the boot one way or another. And the easiest way to do that is kind of the historical version. But there might be other options as well. The opening through the Balkans is, of course, a possibility too. So we'll see which way that goes. On to the Soviets, and we're taking it real easy coming back into the game, just easing in. To the Soviet side of the turn, I missed a German unit that should have been out of supply, so I marked it as such. It got killed along with a Hungarian and another German. We're beginning to see, that whole southern strategy in the Caucasus is falling apart. And meanwhile, the Germans have just given the Soviets 2 more units. So I don't think, I think that finally balanced point where, you know, it wasn't sure whether the Soviets would fall or not. I think that point's passed, and you know, it would have looked really good for the Germans and for the Axis as a whole if they had been able to knock the Soviets out another turn. And they may still. It's not like it's beyond the capability of the Germans to do 5 points of will in one hit. If the Soviets start recapturing more towns, though, things are going to be really, really ugly. I don't think the Axis can turn that around if it happens. But the Soviets have some serious weak points, a unit that's isolated out here that they're going to want to try to throw forces in, as well as defending the line down here. And then this pocket here, you know, pockets are funny though because they can go either way. In order to create a pocket, you have to kind of expose some units. Now this wouldn't be isolated, but it would be, well, it could retreat here. It might have difficulty retreating when you have kind of those units at the edge there like that. I think the German line looks fairly safe there, but we'll see. Now for the Soviets, they also have to worry about their income. The production that they have, they've only got 21 left, and they have a lot of air units. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I got 5 air units there, all of which need replacement points, so that's 15 points right there. And then I got rebuilds that I'd like to make, but you know, obviously I don't have enough money to do that and to save this tank and you know, to strengthen the line here, which currently is okay, but only barely so. A little bit of weakening down in this salient here, and the Soviets could all be cut out of supply and bad things could happen. There's no guarantees weather's going to be good until July, but March, April, it can be pretty ugly, uglier in the north. That's the big mud type event. But elsewhere you start seeing some possibilities for fair weather. Builds and production are in the way, and the Soviets are beginning to look scary big. Just the pumping out of more and more troops along their front line, whereas the Germans, you know, actually had some extra production, but the timing of their losses has put these guys, you know, in their pool for next turn. They're going to have a hard time, and trying to obtain, you know, the kind of offensive that might be able to knock the Russians out of the war. If that fails, that's going to put them in worse and worse position because they just keep spending points. We'll see what the weather's like. They've got to try to hold on a little bit longer before they can dump that on the Russians. And right now the Russian forces look potent, especially, you know, I've got excess troops down here basically. I can start shifting stuff over to fill in the gaps that are a little weaker at the same time that I'm kind of advancing, you know, up until into the Ukraine and Crimea, if possible. There is some defensive value to the rivers down here, though. Meanwhile, this is caved in over here. More and more troops showing up in England, and also, you know, stuff I've got to ship over from North America. So we've actually got enough force to open up the second front. The problem is the supplies for it. You know, as long as I'm actually fighting the Turks down here, I kind of need the supplies. Now, if the Russians manage to break that open, I can use local supplies probably for a lot of this. I have quite a few factories down here. I don't think I can use the French ones anymore, though, because they've been knocked out. So that's just... it's not that many. Looks like it's just 2 factories. That's like 4 units. Kuwait. Nope. Nothing down there. So that's going to be kind of problematic. And the cost of, you know, using my convoys down there, of course I could use less convoys there and more for the transfer, but eventually you got to pay the piper and actually, you know, start supplying all the units. Especially in Europe, there's no supply for me in Europe unless if Russia falls out of the war, I could conceivably bring Spain in or something. But as it stands right now, supply is really, really the painful thing that's preventing the Allied forces from being able to launch a serious attack. That and arranging things. I'd have to ship all this stuff from Britain down to North Africa to launch an attack in Sicily. It's actually easier to launch the attack over in France, but that's a front I don't want to open up. I think I can knock Italy out with pretty much one blow. The surprise attack coming in here, I can drop into Sardinia and I can move here. Alternatively, if I'm cutting through Turkey, if Turkey falls, and this is one reason I didn't want to, try to rush the attack, I can just use this crossing arrow into Rhodes, and that would also be the 5th point. And then I could just do my landings here and here, which, as long as the Italians aren't going to defend it, hey, it's pretty easy for me to take.